Okay, hello there everyone and welcome to the Paper 3 walkthrough for Edexcel B GCSE Geography. Just like my previous two videos, these are my own interpretations and inferences of the specification and materials produced by the exam board. And now let's actually get into it then. So we're on to Paper 3 now, and this is an overview of GCSE Geography B. And we're now on to the last paper, Paper 3, which is all about people and the environment. And this is very much a different paper to Paper 1 and 2 because it's much more about making geographical decisions. There are three topics that you're going to be examined on, and the first one in Section A is people and the biosphere, which is basically looking at your global biomes and their uses. And on Seneca, or in your revision guide and in the specification, this is referred to as Topic 7. Section B is going to be forests under threat, and that is where you're looking at two contrasting biomes here. You've got your tropical rainforest biome and your taiga biome. Remember, the taiga is also referred to as the boreal biome, basically our snow forests here. And in our revision materials and Seneca, that is referred to as Topic 8. And our very last topic on our GCSE Geography course is our consuming energy resources, and that is Section C. Now, this exam, just like your other two papers, is an hour and 30 minutes long, but there is a difference in mark allocation and percentage allocation. This paper is not worth as much as Paper 1 and 2, so it's 25% only, and there's less marks available as a result. Only 64 marks here. Moving on here, we can see that we've got paper 1, 2, and 3. So breakdown of the three papers. Skip to the bottom here. And again, you can see what I've just said there. We've got Section A on the biosphere, B is forest, C energy, and last one, our last final section, question 4, Section D, is where you are going to make a decision. Just to point out here that decision-making question, so that's question 4 on the last section, Section D, is worth a total of 16 marks. So there's 12 marks plus 4 for spelling, punctuation, grammar, and specialist terminology. Exam board recommend or state basically the timing of this exam is broken down to 60 minutes for basically writing plus 30 minutes for reading. Personally, I don't think that allocation works. I would say really you probably got 10 minutes tops for reading, maybe a wee bit more. But fundamentally, we have two 8 markers in this paper and we have a 16 marker in this paper, which means you're going to be working as tightly as Paper 1 and Paper 2 in terms of the time frame that you've been allocated here. I think we need to really read the resource booklet succinctly at the beginning of the paper and get very quickly into answering our questions. We've looked at the AO1 to AO4 breakdown on our previous two paper walkthroughs. This paper concentrates largely on AO3 and AO4, very similar to Paper 2 in that respect. So AO3, if we've forgotten, is all about how you about you applying your knowledge and understanding, not just regurgitating what you know, but applying it. And you're going to apply that knowledge to be able to interpret, analyze, and evaluate geographical information, i.e. the resource booklet, so that you can make some judgments. And you'll do that using AO4, which is your ability to use a variety of skills and techniques to investigate questions and issues to communicate your findings. So this paper is all about AO3 and AO4 and bringing those together. I do apologize. I can't actually see where I kind of am on the screen. So if I'm covering anything, I will put the walkthrough linked into the YouTube channel description so you can bring this up and kind of see what is potentially hidden. Okay, again onto the assessment objectives here then. So we are looking at Paper 3, and again, just like I've said, we are largely looking at AO3 and AO4, and you can see the percentage spread here is 12.1%, slightly less than Paper 2 on AO3. That's the application of your understanding and knowledge. And then your skills is worth 6.7%, slightly less than paper 2. But remember, that is only out of 25% on this paper. Therefore, just like I've been saying, this paper is largely looking at AO3. There's 29 marks for AO3 available, 16 marks for AO4, and then lastly 15 marks for AO1 and AO2. So again, this paper has a completely different feel to paper 1 and 2. It's much more about you taking a resource booklet, which is going to be on a particular issue, contextualized issue, and you breaking it down, synthesizing it with your knowledge and understanding of topics 7, 8, and 9, and also the entire course here, okay? All about applying it to those resources. So here we go again. So just kind of looking at the 4 sections. We've got section A through to section D. Again, A, people in the biosphere, is only worth 8 marks and therefore is only 12.5%. Forests under threat, 8 marks, again, only 12.5%. If you're thinking about where you need to spend the most time for this paper revision-wise, well, that is on consuming energy resources. It's 32 marks. There's 2 8 markers here. I've put assess on the SAM specimen, or the way around, specimen 2016, SAMS 2017, 2018 June exam last year. There have been 2 8 markers on section C, and they've all been assessed so far in all those papers. But it could be evaluated, okay? We'll go into both structures, but overall it's always been assessed. And this is worth 50%, okay, of this paper. So that just shows how important your revision should be on section C, topic 9 of the course. And lastly, section D is where the section A, B, and C tie together, and ultimately you're going to make a decision which is worth 16 marks, the 12 marker plus 4 for SPACT, okay, spelling, punctuation, grammar, specialist terminology, and it's what we call a select and justify question. And clearly it's important because it's worth 25%. Command words, I've gone through these in paper 1 and 2. I'm not going to spend long here on this. If you don't know what each of these command words means, and it's so important that in the exam you sit and you highlight your command words for every single question so you know exactly how you should be approaching them to get maximum marks. Pause this, read them, okay? This paper has all of these command words on. Again, hit pause and read. Just like I said, you're looking at 2 assess questions likely in section C, okay? But they could be, it could be evaluate instead, but 2 8 markers there, and then brand new for paper 3, not being in paper 1 and 2, a select and justify 16 marker, which we'll get to a structure for. Distribution of tariffs for these different command words. Again, please just kind of pause if you would like to look at this. Just to point out again, 2 8 markers on this paper. It could be 2 assesses, 2 evaluate, or assess and evaluate. But thus far, it has been assessed. And as you can see, highest mark question on any of the 3 papers, that's select and justify, worth a total of 25% just on its own. Okay, so let's kind of look at the flow of this paper. Let's start in the top left-hand corner here. So, paper's made up of several sections. We know there's 4, and it's all about making a geographical decision. You are going to get given a resource booklet, which is 10 to 12 pages long, and that constitutes 800 words of text. I recommend before you do anything, you read that entire resource booklet, okay, from the start to the end. That resource booklet will have a range of graphicacy from maps to diagrams like charts, flow diagrams, speech bubbles, photographs, and tables. On the HLS Geography YouTube channel, there is a playlist, geographical skills playlist. Have a look down that playlist, and if there's any skills in there that you don't understand, okay, so for example, off the top of my head, some like isobars, I don't see why that'd be in this paper, but I know that's a skill in that playlist. Anything you don't understand, just go and have a little watch just to bump up your knowledge there. Let's continue here then. So the problem or issue is the focus of this paper, Unit 3, Paper 3. And this paper is always about people and the environment. That's the name of this paper. But the weighting of the paper could be a little bit more towards human or a little bit more towards environmental. And last to point out there, do not expect the 12 marker will always ask you about both. So it could lean one way or the other, more about people or more about the environment. Over here then, if we follow the flow diagram across, our 4 sections are basically looking at the problem or the issue in section B, contextualizing it, kind of expanding on that in terms of more specific options and issues, and then ultimately you're going to make a decision. We can summarize that down here in these 3 arrows. So first off, arrow 1, which goes across the entire exam, is the fact that you need to read the resource booklet from cover to cover. And this is super important to see the big picture. Imagine paper 1 is like a geographical story, okay? They're going to choose somewhere in the world where we've got people, the environment, okay? And there is a crossover between them, and that crossover is causing an issue in a particular place, okay? The resource booklet is the story from start to finish about that issue, about that place. Read it first, because you'll have a better understanding of the story. So when you come to the end and you're asked to finish the story and make a decision, you're clearly more informed to do so. If you just read the first figure or the first resource and answer the first couple of questions, and you do that throughout, you don't make that link across the entire resource booklet. So invest time, 10 minutes at the beginning, getting through the resource booklet. Once you've done that, you'll start to work on the shorter answers in section A and B, which are worth 8 marks each, and then building up towards the longer answers. And that's the 2 8 markers in section C and the 16 marker at the end. And look, that we need to ensure we are planning carefully and we're fully using the resources provided. And that is how you hit AO3 and AO4 in this paper. Okay, my geographers, just a reminder that we've been using these structures for our paper 1, 2, and 3. Pause it, remind yourself of the structures, and let's dig into the different types of questions we might find on this paper. So, very quickly then, explain versus suggest questions. I've gone through this in paper 1 and 2. Major difference here. We could have 2, 3, or 4 markers on explain and suggest. Main thing is, if it suggests, you must start your point from quoting, lifting information from the resource, whilst with explain, you don't have to do that unless specifically told to do so, i.e. it says use the figure. With suggest, it's always going to tell you to use the figure. You've got to use it, the resource. You must list information from it. If you need help structuring suggest and explain questions, pause this, go to paper 1 and 2, go to my timestamps on those videos, hit the timestamp on explain and suggest, and just watch me handwrite some answers to how you develop your points with key phrases like this leads to, this means that, and as a result. Okay, other types of questions you might get. You may get these 2 different types of describing questions. Describe trends and describe distributions. I want you to handle them in a similar way with a similar structure. Just a reminder that when we think about trends, we're looking for patterns and we're looking for rates. That's how to think of trends, describing rates, describing patterns. So here we've got oil consumption and oil production in Peru. And over here, when we're thinking about distribution, we're thinking about how spread out something is. So here we were given forest cover in 1915 versus forest cover in 2015. So we're looking at how spread out, how distributed is that forest cover between that temporal time jump, okay? i.e. again, we're looking for patterns. So if you get one of these questions, I recommend we use this structure, the T. Cute little cup of tea, okay? Use the T structure. T stands for trend. So what is the general pattern of distribution, or what is the general pattern of the trend in the line graph? And to help you with that, think about the following. Have a look at the data. Is it consistent? Is it irregular? Could you subdivide it into periods or categories? Is it increasing, decreasing, by how much? Is it getting faster or slower? So that's the rate. Is the rate getting faster or slower? Like if we go back up here, we can see there's a considerate increase in the rate of production and consumption in Peru from 2009 onwards. What is the maximum and minimum data set? So again, looking at these line graphs here, this is probably my minimum for oil production and maximum for oil production. And I could look at the different years here and how is it changing over time. Okay, so use the think about section to think about trends that are appearing either on a describe the trend or describe the distribution question. Next, whatever trends you are able to pick out, back them up with a specific example from the resource, whether it's a graph or a table or a map. Use whatever specific geographical information is given to you. Okay, so here you must use years. Here it would be talking about barrels per day, and I'd be specifically quoting data from the resource. Here I've been given the tropics and the equator. I'd be referencing that and my knowledge of these continents and countries. Be specific, lift quote specific data. Your geographers, make sure you do that. Now let's just discard that and let's pop this up. Another type of question you may get, very similar, is comparing trends. So you might be given two resources, and in a very similar manner, you can go approach it in a similar way to just describing the trends or distributions that I've just gone through. But with this question, compare them. How alike are they? How different are they? Is there a pattern? Do they correspond? So is there a relationship? Does one go up? Does the other go up? Or is the relationship inverse, i.e. one goes up and as one increases, the other decreases? Look for maximums and minimums in the data. So there's the maximum and that looks like the minimum. There's the maximum of this data set and there's the minimum. So do they match and do they influence one another? Here there's clearly a match between fossil fuel prices and palm oil prices. And then look at dates. So is there any key dates or time periods where there's a significant change? So we've got this increase here and this increase here. So just before 2008 and just after 2008, okay, for oil and then for palm oil. And similar down here, it looks like there's a decrease in just before 2014 and then just after that in palm oil. So when you compare the trends, go through this process to create your points. Okay, assess questions. You're likely to get two assess questions. So far, Specimen, SAMS and June 2018 exam have had two assess questions in section C, but they could be evaluate. You could have assess, evaluate, 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 but thus far they have been double assess. So I'm going to take that approach, but I will mention the evaluate structure at the end. So with all assessed questions, every paragraph must be the PEEL structure. PEEL, point, evidence, explanation, and link. So to start your points off, I would look in an assessed question for having 3 developed points, i.e. 3 paragraphs, and each paragraph you could potentially start it with like, this is my most important, then my second most important, my least important point, or just firstly, secondly, thirdly. Evidence must be from the resource. Now I'm going to cross out case study knowledge. This has been lifted from the paper 1 and 2. We're not really looking at that in this paper at all. It is evidence from the resource. I would love us all to use the phrase, this is evident. Okay, so you make your point and then you say, this is evident by, and this is where you quote from the figures or the resources that it's asked you to use. And the question is likely to pick out certain resources. And if it mentions the resource in any question in this paper, you've got to use it. And you've got to show the examiner you're using it. And by using the phrase, this is evident by, and as an example, figure 3, which shows I'm showing the examiner I'm using the resource. I'm picking up those AO3 and AO4 marks. Remember, there's so much percentage of this paper, 29 marks is on AO3. Do that. You then go into your explanation, where you're going to use key phrases like this leads to, this means that, as a result, to develop your evidence. And then we're going to link it back into the question, and you're going to link it to the main geographical phrase of the question, and you must say how important or how significant, that's what significance means. How important is this point overall? So I would say something like this is minimally important or minimally significant, averagely, largely, massively significant because. So I'm going to go point, evidence from the resource, quote a figure, explain it with a key phrase, this leads to, this means that, as a result, and then I'm going to tie back in 2-3 sentences back to the question, back to the main geographical phrase of the question, and just say overall why that point was important, because judgment gets you throughout an assessed question into the top level. Overall structure then, let's go. Factor 1, your first point, most important point, paragraph 1, then go into your second paragraph, your second factor, your second idea, third factor, least important idea, paragraph 3, then make a mini conclusion. We're talking here 2 to 3 sentences long only, where you make an overall judgment linking back to the question. All 3 of these must be the Peel structure. Again, use evidence from the resource, and I would use a reflexive phrase to begin this paragraph, this paragraph, this paragraph, and that would be something like a phrase such as, on the other hand, nevertheless, although, yet. Don't know what we have done there. It looks like we crashed. Give me a second. Okay. So yeah, let's use a reflexive phrase on the start of these 3 paragraphs. The last one clearly should be just in conclusion or overall. Factor 2 and 3, use one of these. Learn a couple of them off by heart. Start your phrases with them. It shows the examiner that you are reflecting, you are weighing up, you are assessing throughout your structure. When you get the actual question to help you come up with that structure or how to structure your answer, do these 3 things. 1, highlight box, underline the command word, which is likely to be assessed, might be evaluate. Underline the key geographical phrase. What is the key thing it's asking you to assess? And then I would quickly plan at the top of your page, annotate the question, your 3 factors, okay, from the resource and your subject knowledge. Quickly example of that is if I go here to the exam, and that's not what I wanted to do. Let's just scroll down. There we go, section C, 32 marks. So here I've got an assessed question. I would quickly underline my command word, and then it's asking me to assess the environmental impacts of exploiting Indonesia's energy resources. So my key geographical phrase here is environmental impacts. I must, in every one of my points, link back to that. I'm going to link back and say how important my 3 points are to the environmental impacts on Indonesia's resources. Let's have a look at another one. Second 8 marker in section C. Again, underline the command word. Assess the reason why people disagree over who is to blame for deforestation. I'd say the key geographical phrase here is who is to blame for deforestation. So at the end of my 3 points, I'm going to link back to that phrase. I'm going to use that phrase in that link. I'm going to say how important the point is in relation to that phrase. And what I would do very quickly before I start answering this is annotate 3 different points that could be used to answer that. And I'm going to obviously look at studying figure 10 because that's going to help me with the evidence and to create those 3 points. Okay. And clearly, I'm going to link back to that key geographical phrase when I answer those. Okay then, so let's keep going with the assessed questions. Okay, so far, there's kind of been the pattern of two types of assessed questions. So let's look at the first 8 marker. Now, the first 8 marker on section C, and again, I'm saying assessed because so far they've all been assessed, but they could be evaluated. But they have been about assessing the impacts, be it positive or negative, of some sort of energy extraction on the environment, and also about assessing that on a scale. So whether that's from a local, i.e. a local area, to the global globe itself, or from local to global. So basically, it's been some sort of question about assessing impacts and potentially on a scale, okay, whether it's a local area up to a global. Here's an example. June 2018, it was about assessing environmental impacts. The SAMS was about assessing local and national benefits of. I've done it again. All right, no idea what's happening there. Apologies again. So, I've also got a bit of a cold. All right, so we are using evidence from the resource assessing local and national economic benefits of developing. So, as I say, it's all about basically developing some energy resource and potential impacts of that, okay? So the first one here, June 2018, just the general environmental impacts. This one, what would the economic benefits, the economic impacts be on a scale from local to national's country? And then the one from the specimen was assessing again the local impacts. I literally have no idea what it's doing. Let's crack back on. Sorry all, just bear with me a second. So this is all about assessing the impact. So how could we do this then? You need to come up with 3 different points, okay? And you need to come up with 3 different points about assessing the potential positive negatives on the environment or potentially economically. And it could be asking you to do that from a small scale, local, to a much larger scale, national, global. So here's some ideas. So when you look at the resource and when you think about the impacts, question yourself about these different potential ways of creating ideas, creating points, creating factors. Remember, you need 3. So you could look at positives and just general negatives. That's quite a simplified way of doing it. Maybe you could look at more severe impacts versus less severe impacts. You could look at the more important impacts or benefits and maybe the less important impacts, benefits. Like these could be like how you order your 3 points, like just general positives, okay, down to negatives, more severe impacts to less severe, more important impacts, benefits to less important. Maybe you could look at how some impacts from the resource could be irreversible. That would not be very good, okay? I think current climate change, and those that are reversible are probably less impactful, less severe, less costly. Could you think about how some impacts are linked or they have knock-on effects, okay? So, I don't know, pollution of local water supplies, that would have a knock-on effect onto, I don't know, local tourism, onto local industries like fishing industries, extraction of that in local residents' homes, use of that water for agricultural purposes. So that would make that point or that impact much greater if it has more knock-on effects. And again, if there's more limited knock-on effects, it's more isolated, you might deem it less of an impact, less costly, or even less beneficial. You could look at it just as a spatially, so local impacts or local benefits only, but something if it had a much bigger global impact or global benefit. So you could look at it on that scale. You could, throughout your points that you're creating, kind of maybe look at the fact that actually it's not all happening to every place. So it could be that actually one place is having larger impacts or more benefits, and actually other places within the context are having bigger impacts, smaller impacts, better benefits, worse, less good benefits, i.e. so place 1 could be experience landscape scarring via tar sands, and another place maybe experiencing water extraction pollution for industrial purposes. Either way, from the resource, can you pick this out? Pick out the fact that not everything's happening to one place, and are some places being more impacted than others? We could look at how the impacts or the benefits are sustainable versus unsustainable. Again, look at the fact that some might only be beneficial or may only be negative impacts or positive impacts in the short term. That wouldn't be as good as those benefits in the long term. And obviously flip that if it's negative short terms for long term gains, that might be good. But obviously if it's short term gain for long term negative impacts, that's not good. And last one, could you look at impacts, both positive and negatives, or the impact on the environment or economically from a government point of view? So maybe there has been government action, like policies and legislation, law creation that is good, that had a positive impact, or maybe the opposite of that, or maybe there has just been government inaction. So there's been a bit of a turning a blind eye. So the idea, the versus column here, is to help you create points to answer that geographical key phrase. Last little bit here is we should be quite comfortable as geographers of SEEP, so social, economic, environmental, and political. So in creating your 3 points to answer the question, you could break it down like, what are the positives and negatives socially, positive negatives economically, positive negatives environmentally, positive and negatives politically. And this could, by sitting there and going through the versus table in your head, or going through SEEP in your head, I'm looking at these resources. It's told me to study figure 9, figure 8, and figure 9. What are the social benefits, negatives, economic benefits, negative? Go through the process to create your points. Right. Last little bit. If it talks about scale, that means we're looking from a small scale, like a town or a city, getting bigger, like a county, through to a region. So for the UK, like the Midlands, Southeast, Southwest, Northeast, Northwest, Yorkshire, and the Humber, and so forth. And then state, that is where we're getting there through, getting to a country level. Okay. We could also look at that slightly different. So we could look at a local area, getting bigger, national, country, regional, i.e. maybe a region of a continent like South Asia, Southern Asia, the Indian subcontinent, or it could be a region as big as a continent, and then through to the globe. Either way, when we look at scale and how an issue and the impacts of an issue could be managed, if we're looking at it on a smaller scale, so a narrower geographical scope, where we try to manage the impacts or manage an issue, the likelihood is we only need to involve, so we might have to involve a lot of local stakeholders, local players, people who will be affected by, who have an opinion on what we're studying, that issue. It might need a lot of community ownership, so a lot of the community being involved and taking part. It might need a lot of interventions, a lot of strategies, and there might be a lot of tailoring of solutions to the local conditions. So local scale needs this, but on a wider scale, so I think national, regional, through to global, when we look at tackling a problem or managing an issue on a larger scale, it probably needs the alignment, so the working together of some larger political institutions and systems. For example, governments, and then like larger international governmental organizations like the EU and the United Nations. They're probably looking to address issues relevant to a very more narrow set of high-level stakeholders and players. Probably needs a targeted policies that are going to be able to be targeted over a much wider scale, geographical area, and that whatever solutions are used need to apply to a range of diverse communities. Okay, so just two different ways to think about how we manage issues on an increasingly larger scale. Now, I'm gonna have a quick drink. Okay, section C, second 8 marker. Right, this has so far been assess again, could be evaluate. We'll stick with assess for the time being. And this is the last question on section C before you transition onto the last section and last question. So far, we can see we've got June 2018 SAM specimen. It has been, again, assess. And it's all been about players. So players are people, groups, organization, individuals affected by whatever we're studying. They're involved in the issue. They have an opinion on it. So far, it's all been about assessing players. So this one last year, assessing the reasons why people disagree over who is to blame for deforestation, assessing why the reasons why some groups are against the development of oil and gas, assessing reasons why there are mixed views on the development of tar sands. So it's all about you showing that there's different interests of players, they have different opinions, and there's conflict between them. So if you're not given the players in the exam, you might be thinking, well, who are these players that you could reference? Because you need to reference. It's asking for specific groups in these 8 markers. So potentials, you could talk about pressure groups and environmentalists like Greenpeace. You could talk about TNC, so transnational corporations. Remember, they are huge corporations, okay, that operate across the world in multiple countries. They sell multiple products. They probably have their business divided amongst countries. So the head office probably in a developed country like the USA, and then they'll have factories and industry in developing and emerging countries like Brazil, India, and China. These TNCs might be involved in foreign direct investment (FDI), where they've actually invested in foreign countries within developing and emerging countries. But in the context of this, you're likely to come across or mention energy companies, BP, Shell, and so on. Other players, IGOs, intergovernmental organizations. So these are not-for-profit, non-profit organizations who act independently of governments. Basically are charities. Posher word for charities, use IGOs. So Greenpeace, not Greenpeace, ignore that, sorry. Oxfam, okay, would be an example of IGOs. In fact, absolute rubbish. Just ignore what I've just said. Just gone off on a complete tangent there. IGOs, sorry, intergovernmental organizations. It is getting a wee bit late. Sorry, lads and lasses. So intergovernmental organizations. So this is basically where we've got a team up, okay, of sovereign countries, of country states. Okay, so for example, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, the IMF, United Nations, EU, European Union. These are IGOs. So it's where countries come together, they create alliances. There'll be a agreement between them, and they work together. Okay. NGOs, the one that I just foolishly mixed up, non-governmental organizations. These are not-for-profit, non-profit organizations that act outside or independently of government. Basically, are charities. An example there would be like WaterAid, Oxfam. Indigenous people, super important to this exam. Indigenous people are the original inhabitants of that area, of that land. Okay, so an example would be the First Nations people of Canada. Okay, an example of those would be like the Inuits. Okay, so the original ethnic group in that area. Okay, we might find new settlers and migrants who move into an area because of work. We might just have other local residents and villagers there. Forest experts, and then last one, governments, from just a local scale to a national scale. Now, these players may not agree, and these are some general arguments that you could learn for your exam. One thing that you might want to use, one terminology which the exam likes, or the examiners like, is that you could refer to the winners versus the losers, or basically those who are for or against whatever the issue is in the question. So, From this question, I can see that there are some winners, some losers. Oh, from this question, I can see there'll be some for this or some people against this. So I've tried to group these into two categories, two parts of this table. So generally, if we're looking at for extraction of a resource or for economic gain over environmental loss, or the general winners from that scenario, we probably can go with T&Cs here, especially the energy companies, because of the economic gains they're going to make. Also, new settlers or migrants who move into an area because they're going to get new economic employment opportunities. These, along with local residents who already live there, are probably going to get access to new services due to the boom town. So the town that's going to boom and grow surrounding whatever this industry is. Like, let's say it was a mine, we might get a larger mining town, and new infrastructure is going to come in, new services are going to come in, and local residents and migrants who move into the area will benefit. We may see winners being the alliance between the governments and the T&Cs who are working together for the goal that the government is probably allowing this industrial growth for, which is economic development. And the country is going to be able to economically develop through the tax and trade revenue generated through the for whatever this industrial growth is, or this energy growth is. There's going to be better infrastructure in the country because the likes of T&Cs might build better roads, rail, port, and so forth. Energy, other infrastructure like water and energy. And the country itself is probably going to get increased energy security from this, from whatever this in the issue, whatever the core energy is, energy type flowing through the resource booklet, i.e. it could be tar sands or hydroelectric power, whatever it is. But the likelihood is the country is going to get more energy security, i.e. they're getting the energy that they need at the price they need it for. The losers are those probably going to be generally against economic growth over environmental degradation, i.e. those who are going to be more for protecting the environment. Is probably all of us, is one thing we could state, because the forests, be it taiga or tropical rainforest, provide us all with services, i.e. medicine could be an example. The major one is going to be indigenous people, because they're going to have land right issues where potentially their historical land, traditional land is maybe being sold or is being extracted via the T&Cs. Here, land sold by T&Cs to the government. They may have erosion of culture because we're getting new roads built and people moving into the area, which is going to cause a loss of traditional ways of life, especially hunting grounds. They might bring with them new diseases or vices like alcoholism. Okay, example of that is Aboriginal Australians and modern day issues of alcoholism and lower life expectancy in that area. And there may be issues over water supplies for indigenous people because the extraction and pollution of that by the T&C. Other losers, or those against potential expansion of some sort of energy type, may be those involved in ecotourism, because there'll probably be an overlap between the energy development, i.e. let's say it was a mine or oil pipelines, and their businesses. So it might have a negative impact on their business. Remember, ecotourism, environmentally friendly green tourism. Environmentalists like Greenpeace and pressure groups will obviously be negative or view that, or may be the potential losers due to the damage done to the environment. And lastly, we might also have NGOs, so our charities, non-governmental organisations. There might be those involved in supporting the local communities, like those indigenous people, who might be the losers in the scenario, or against development of that energy, especially if it's going to have a negative impact on the environment. Okay, another matrix here. This is actually taken from business. So we've got a players analysis here. So we're thinking about, why do players not agree with each other? So here we've got power. So some players have more power than others. That's a reason why they don't agree in any situation or issue, from low to high. And another reason is because of interest levels. Some players are more interested in the issue and scenario. So one way we can look at why some players aren't agreeing with each other is the amount of power they have and the amount of interest they have. Let's say we're looking at mining tar sand production in Alberta, Canada. So here, those with, I'm going to just move it over here actually. Yeah, let's go with this one. I like this one more. So this is still power. We still got power here. And down here, we still got interest. So if we were looking at, again, tar sand production in Canada, key player here, so a stakeholder, a player, sorry, keep using the old terminology, with lots of power and would be very much interested would be the Canadian government. So they would be would have lots of power and very much invested in that issue. Now, a player who might need consideration shown to them because they have lots of interest up here, but actually very little power, very little say, well, that could be our Indigenous people. Now, another player who might need who we could term as having their needs met because they do have power, but actually very little interest in that local area. They might have very little interest in Alberta, Canada, where the tar sands are, tar sand production. That might be the consumers. So us, okay, who are sat at home on our computers, having that energy provided to us via those tar sands. Well, we have lots of power because we are influencing the TNCs and we're influencing the government. But we're not really that interested in the actual impacts in that local area. And the least important overall player here could be like the tar sand miners. So those who actually work in there, they probably have very little interest in the overall impacts of what they're doing because they need a job, they're earning money, and potentially they also have very little power because they're basically being employed to do that job with very little say. So this is just one matrix to think about why in certain situations players may not be agreeing with each other. Some may have more power, some may have more interest, a mixture of that. Last little other matrix, so I've got the little honeycomb matrix here on why players may not agree with each other. So let's go through my 6 examples. One, issues are just complex. So if you get a question and tell me why these players aren't agreeing with each other, why do they blame each other? Well, frankly, something like palm oil production, okay, or drilling or fracking, okay, that's a complex issue. Okay, so you can use that as a point and develop it using a resource. Another reason why any of these issues are complex and why players would disagree, agree, have been conflict, blame each other, is because they're happening at a variety of scales. So the issue could be happening from local to global, okay? So it's really hard to decide who is actually at fault here. Which for some reason I put twice. Third one, another reason why people might be at conflict or blaming each other is because the perspectives differ upon knowledge of the big picture, okay? And an example of that would be Indigenous people might blame the local company, i.e. the local company that's mining, the local company that's logging, okay? The local company that is growing biofuels and, burning down the forest to do so. But really, it is the TNC employing that company or the consumers who are demanding it, okay? So, the potential player does not understand the bigger picture and may only be looking at a smaller picture and blame different players as a result of that. Fourth one, perspectives might differ based upon their actual education levels of the players. So Indigenous people, and not all Indigenous people clearly here, okay? So, don't go extreme. But some, not all, may be unaware of their own impact, okay? i.e. they may be doing small-scale forest clearance, okay, themselves for agricultural purposes. Fifth one, should be quite comfortable with this. Humans are quite happy to point fingers in life, okay, rather than taking ownership. And you can use this as a point. So the players might point up the chain. So TNCs may not take ownership and say it's not their fault because they are simply meeting consumer demands, pointing up the chain. And last one, there may just be a complete lack of understanding of the players, of other players' opinions and needs. An example might be that government may not consult locals like indigenous people and think the government might be thinking that actually they're acting in the best interest of those groups because whatever they're doing, this energy investment, they are perceiving it that it's going to help economic development and improve the quality of life for those locals / indigenous people. But actually, if they involve them in the process, they might find that they are against it. So the issue here is a lack of talk, a lack of consultation, a lack of understanding of others' opinions. Hopefully that'll help you with those 2-8 markers. Last little bit here on players, just to drum home the issue or thinking about indigenous people. Here, we've got map 1, and this shows us forest cover. Okay, so here, if I just scroll across here, draw across here, these are our boreal forests of taiga. Major countries like Alaska, which is part of the USA, remember that, Canada, coming across here to Norway, Sweden, Finland, then northern Russia. And then, this area here between our tropics and our equator, we've got our tropical rainforests, okay? Over here, map 2, this is the amount of oil barrels available. Okay, I've just picked one resource, and the darker it is, the more there is. Reserves, sorry, that is still available. So clearly we can see that is ignore that line, let's do this. There is some correlation here. Just looking at boreal, this line here, lots of forest. This line here, lots of oil reserves. Okay, available oil underground, under permafrost. Third one, this is showing us the overlap of resource, forest, and indigenous people. So red is where we find major indigenous peoples. Okay, again, like the First Nations people in northern Canada, Greenland, and areas of Iceland. Blue is critically important wetlands, so that's where we've got critically important habitat. So we've got some biodiversity there, like flora and fauna, or biotic factors, biotics living, floras, flowers, plants, faunas, or animals. So we've got, it's a habitat that's critically important, and we've got a critically important habitat of our forests. And then these purple are biodiversity hotspots where there's a massive range in those biotic factors. But you can see that especially up here, we've got Iceland, Greenland, Canada here, Alaska, USA. There's that overlap between indigenous people, those that are, as I said, original inhabitants of these lands. Okay, very traditional way of living in these areas, long-standing. We've got important forests, important wetlands, but look, it overlaps with this one available resource. Again, northern Scandinavia, northern Russia, massive amount of indigenous people. Wetlands, forests, overlaps with this massive reserve in oil. So there's going to be natural conflict between TNCs and governments who might want to extract the resources versus the impacts on indigenous people. And personally, if you get on that assess question for players, I personally think if you are given a choice on which players to use, I think the two massively opposing are TNCs versus indigenous people. And then in the middle, you've got the government, and the government might be leaning one way or the other. So they might be trying to work with TNCs for economic development of the country, but also having to be aware of and cater towards indigenous people. But from the context, the resource people, you might find they're leaning one way or the other. But if you get a choice, those three, I think, would be superb for the 3 points you make. Okay, we're on to the last bit. Select and justify questions. This is your 16 marker, the last question on the paper. And I would say on this 1.5-hour paper, you should transition to this at the hour point. So start the exam, write down what time, look at the clock, Write down what time you should be transitioning onto this question, i.e. an hour in. So an hour in, you should be thinking, right, I'm an hour in, I'm on the 8 marker, the second 8 marker, last question, section C. That's where you should be at. I'm going to finish it, and within 5 minutes, I'm transitioning onto the 60 marker and giving myself 25 minutes on this. Now, this select and justify question is on AO2, 3, and 4, and there's a 4-mark distribution between them, and there's 4 marks for spelling, punctuation, grammar, and specialist terminology. Go through your paper at the end, okay, the 60 mark if you get time. Double check your sentences read grammatically correct. Tweak any of that on. Look at your spellings. Words like environmental, right? Look, environment is here. Make sure that ends there. Government, make sure the ends in the middle of that word government. Check your capitalization of place names. And look at any of your phrases. Could you upcycle the terminology? For example, you say there's more people are dying. Say increase in death rate. People aren't living as long. Okay, decrease in life expectancy. Whatever. Just could you go through your paper? This question, sorry. And there's any phrases you've used where you know there's a better geographical term. Don't use charities. You're going to use NGOs, non-governmental organizations. You mentioned the United Nations. Refer to it as an IGO. Get those extra potential 3 or 4 out of 4 on your SPACT. Okay, going through this question, like unpicking it. So first thing to remember from the outset is the issue, and the paper begins, the resource booklet, with that phrase. So if I discard this and I go here, this is section D, and you can see here, this is last section, question 4. And if I scroll down to the resource booklet, the very first thing it tells me is what the issue is, okay? And we can see there's the issue is conflict over energy and the environment in Indonesia, okay? Remember, it's always going to be surrounded that people in the environment, okay? And it's bullet pointing me the core issue in 4 bullet points. Now, back to my PowerPoint here. Remember that the issue is complex and fraught, okay? i.e., okay, there's no perfect answer here. This paper is got a nexus, so the links between people, the biosphere, forests, and energy. So that's the major overlap of themes, okay? And within whatever those 4 always overlap in all these papers, and in that overlap is always going to be within a certain issue. The one that I just showed you was energy in Indonesia, and that issue is complex and fraught. i.e., remember in this question, there will always be winners and losers, whatever happens, okay? So remember that, use it, use that language in your answer if appropriate. That, remember, governments may be acting in the short term, not for long-term benefit, and that local actions may have that knock-on effect I spoke about earlier, okay, from local to global impacts. So this issue is complex, it's not perfect, some people might win, some people might lose players, government might be acting for short-term benefits rather than long-term gains, or maybe flipped, and that local actions may have that knock-on effect globally. Here's just a process to go through in helping you make a decision. Now, what I should have said, let's just kind of discard a minute, go to the exam paper, is this last question is going to ask you to look at 3 options. So you're going to get option 1, option 2, option 3. It's been the same for the 3 papers, the specimen SAMs and the exam last year, June 2018. And it's asking the Indonesian government, remember, connect it back to the issue. The issue here is conflicts over energy environment in Indonesia, 4 bullet points. All right, so the Indonesian government can choose from the following three options: option 1, 2, 3, and we call it select and justify because the question asks you to select which option the government should choose that would be best for its people and environment. Remember, it might ask you for just people, just the environment, or both. Double check which one it is, circle which one it is. And we call it select and justify because you must justify your choice. Use information from the resource booklet, all of it, all those figures, use them all multiple times. And also your knowledge and understanding from the rest of your geography course to support your answer. Choose an option, you write down which one you choose here, and it's worth 12 marks. And bottom here, that's spelling, punctuation, grammar, and use of specialist terminology 4, making that 60 marks, 25% of your paper. So back here then, when you get to that choice making, so when you get your three choices, use this, okay? Identify the issue, work your way through this, understand why the issue exists, identify possible solutions, weigh up the solutions, and make that final decision. Choose one of them. So this is a flow diagram you can follow as a thinking process to making that choice. You might want to pause this and have a look at that in more detail. Okay, and lastly, a bit more guidance on this, on helping you make that initial decision. So when you're weighing up the three options, okay, the question again might ask you for what's best for the people and or the environment. Double check which one it is. Don't get this bit wrong or else you're going to drop marks. And what you can do is, if it's asking about people, think about these questions to help you make a choice on which of the three choices to select. So which decision is best for the people? One, well, who, which people, which players? We've looked at different types of players earlier. Are we talking about whole communities, countries, or the whole world? Two, how is it best for the people? Is it best economically, socially, culturally, politically? And three, is it best for all groups, including Indigenous people? Look how important Indigenous people is. Use the language in your exam, or just some. Okay, so does some groups benefit over others? Why are others losing out here? And so forth. And if it's about the environment, then one, what parts of the environment are we talking about? Ecosystems, water, land, air. Two, is it only impacting the local environment, or are we talking about it globally? Again, go back to scale, local to that regional, national, global. And again, what's best for the environment? Think short term to long term. So this is a way for you to unpack, i.e. help you decide which choice to make. What I'd say here is you're going to spend half of your write-up on this question on the choice you make. Okay, over half, sorry. So whichever one you choose, I would confidently tell you to go with the option that you know more about. So even if it isn't gut feeling the one you would actually choose in let's say this was real life, you had to actually make this decision for the Indonesian government, whatever, okay, I would think, what do I know subject knowledge wise that I can bring into your answer? Because the more you can bring in, the better you'll do. So whichever one you know more about, I'd write about that one. Okay, last few bits here to help on the 60 marker, and then we'll look at a structure. 4 marks for AO3. So we're going to use that peel structure for our paragraphs. This E is evidence, this E is explanation. So when you get to your peel paragraphs, to get those AO3, use connective phrases like the following, because these are connective phrases that force you to evaluate and force you to justify. Remember, select and justify question. This is probably the best choice overall. However, despite these reflexive phrases we've looked at before, but there are disadvantages. Not everyone will benefit. Moreover, the benefits may outweigh short-term gains. In summary, and to get those AO4 marks, okay, again, pick it up in the evidence section, your peel paragraph. Okay, this is where you need to bring together multiple figures. So figure 3 shows ... and this is further supported by figure 4. So if you can synthesize, if you can pull together multiple figures, that will look even more impressive to the examiner. last bit here, well, second last bit on this page. So when you justify your decision, think back to the issue. So here, so this side of my screen, I'm looking back at the June 2018 exam, which was the issue was all about conflicts over energy and the environment in Indonesia. 4 major bullet points. And then the last question of the paper, asks you to choose out of 3 options, and ultimately, whichever option you choose should be the option that is able to rectify, to help those 4 bullet points the most. Okay, and obviously you're going to unpack that using all the resources in the booklet, support your points with all the resources in the booklet. But if I just go to the paper here, basically what I'm saying is, whatever that issue is here, this is the issue summarized in 4 bullet points. Ultimately, the first bit of information you're given in the exam, in the resource booklet, ultimately is what you're going to attempt to answer in the final question by making a choice. And you're going to support that choice with everything you've learned by answering the paper and all the other resources provided to you. Okay? As I say, a lot of information, probably only got 10 to 15 minutes to get through that information at the beginning. Back to this. Last little bit here then, in your select and justify question, 6 things to help you to hit that AO2, AO3, and AO4. So AO2 is your understanding. Make sure that you make detailed, extended explanations. So use the key phrases I like. This leads to, this means that, as a result, after your points to develop them. Try bringing other information from the GCSE course outside of topic 7, 8, and 9. Can you recognize and make relationships, connections between different geographical ideas and information between multiple topics that you've been taught? AO3, can you make a balanced argument and ensure you justify your view, making an overall judgment using evidence from the resource? This is evident by figure 3, which is also supported by figure 9. AO4, make sure you use a range of accurate information from the booklet. Lift, quote, paraphrase from the booklet. Figure 7 shows, figure 8 shows, figure 9. Look how important it is to actually use the phrases, figures. Use it in your answers, 2A markers, and this select and justify 60 marker. And try to make your argument critical. So when you're using evidence from the booklet, be critical. However, figure A shows oil prices are not reliable income because. So try to be as critical as possible with the resources. Some arrows. Okay. A couple of things to throw in there before we wrap up. Probably got about 10 more minutes left. 3 key phrases I don't want you to forget, because these may appear in the 16 marker and you may want to use them to improve your answer. 1, economic activity. Remember, this is how people make money, and these can be our primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary jobs. Don't know those, go away, revise them. 2, economic development. Remember, that is the process by which the quality of lives of people in a country improves. Now that's economically, socially, and politically. And now the difference between that and sustainable development is where a country develops economically without the depletion of natural resources. So natural resources, those resources extracted for human needs and uses. So how can we think about sustainable development? Well, that is where we are getting that overlap between the environment, economy, and social community positively. Or a better way that I like us to think about it is the 3-legged sustainability stool. So something could be seen as being sustainable in its development if the environmental leg means we are limiting pollution and waste, that we're using renewable energy, and we're thinking about conservation and restoration. Something could be sustainable in its development socially if we have good working conditions, health, education, services, and community and culture is protected. And then something could be seen as economically sustainable if we have good jobs, fair wages, security in jobs, i.e. people aren't going to lose their jobs easily, fair trade, and appropriate infrastructure. So the energy, water, transport, and so forth. And if we do have those three legs, the stool won't topple and fall over, and therefore we are getting improvements in quality of life, improvements in terms of genuine wealth, and overall genuine progress. So these phrases are something that you might want to use in the 16 marker to impress the examiner. All right, last bit, the structure, how I've asked my classes to structure their 16 marker. I use something called RAW, this little dinosaur. So RAWR. Okay, let's go through it. Paragraph 1, the R is their reason, their best reason for their chosen option out of the 3 choices, which is their best reason. And I asked them to do a PL paragraph. Point, evidence from the resource, explain it using our key phrases. This leads to, this means that, as a result, link it back to the question, the key geographical phrase, say how important, significant it is. Next, raw, another reason, second best for your chosen option. So we're going to have 2 fully developed points on your why you chose your option. Again, peel, point, evidence from the resource, key phrases to explain, link back to the key geographical phrase of the question, and see how important the point is. Next one, what is the main or major weakness of your chosen option? Because nothing's perfect. So whatever choice you choose, say what's also weak about it. However, my choice is not fully sustainable because, and again, evidence from the resource, explain, link back. Next, 4th paragraph, I want the reasons, and this is the R, the final bit of raw. So that's reason, another weakness, R for reason. What were the reasons why you rejected the other 2 options? Now, if you have time, I break this into 2 paragraphs. One for one choice you rejected, and one for the other choice you rejected. And again, point, evidence, explain, link back to the question, make a judgment about how important that point is in relation to the question and the key geographical phrase. So if you can, have paragraph 4 and paragraph 5, brilliant. If you're running out of time, do it in 1. Lastly, just quickly, a 2-3 sentence conclusion where you answer the question, make a final judgment. A couple of things to think about. I mentioned earlier that you need to use evaluative and connective. Wait a minute, let's just discard. And let's open this back up. So, mentioned before to use evaluative and connective phrases. So these phrases here, this is where you use them in the evidence part of your PL paragraph, and also ensure that you are bringing together figures, using multiple figures when you provide that evidence to hit A or 4. Reflexive phrases we talked about in the assess questions. Use these at the beginning of these paragraphs. So start paragraph 2, 3, 4, paragraph 5 if you have time. If not, combine that into 1 and your conclusion. So use, on the other hand, similarly, on balance, in contrast, despite this, alternatively, however, okay, in conclusion at the end. Last little bit here, nearly done. I mentioned earlier that there's 4 marks for AO2, 3, and 4. Now, AO2, let's just concentrate on before we wrap up on select and justify. Now, AO2 is actually a bit that's done potentially weak on the 16 marker. And at the end of the question, it says this sentence: and knowledge and understanding from the rest of your geography course to support your answer. Now, let's go to the exam paper. Let's look at that. So here's the question. And I'm just going to rub it out. Let's rub this bit out. Sorry. Just wait a sec. All right. So let's go on the highlighter. So look, massive amount of information. Last thing it says, use information from the resource booklet. That's AO3, AO4. That goes into your evidence and evidence section. And then it says, and understanding from the rest of the geography course to support your answer. That phrase has been in the specimen, SAMS, and in June 2018. So it wants you to put in your answer information from other topics. Okay, so not just topics 7, 8, and 9 for this paper 3. Bring in other information. So how do you do that? Well, in your Peel paragraphs, you go point, evidence. Okay, again, this is evident from figure 3, which is also supported by figure 9, whatever. Then when you go to explain it with your key phrases, this means that as a result, this leads to, in your explanation, could you weave in there just a sentence or two? Does not have to be that much, too much more than that. Do not go off on a tangent. But in every point, or just try get into a couple of the points, a couple of the paragraphs, can you weave in there some subject knowledge outside of paper 3s? How do you do that? Well, maybe you could just put in there a theory, mention a theory in passing that supports the point you're making, that supports the figure that you're using. So that could be Rostow, Frank, Boserup, or Malthus. They are logical theories that could slot into this question and this issue. What about a process? So process, something that is happening, and you've learned a lot of key processes across GCSE geography. Ones that might be appropriate is maybe those that are part of the hydrological cycle, especially if it's on, if the question's about, I don't know, deforestation or something like that. So could you slot in a key process, infiltration, interception, surface runoff? I've just used hydrological terms for rivers there, but you could use other key processes that you've been taught. I don't know, urbanization, if we've got a boom town, a mining town growing, okay? Terms about migration. Could you reference a case study? Now, do not think you need to learn all your case studies inside and out. You should know them anyway for this paper, I'm saying. But could you slot in there just some mention of your case studies, parallel case studies that link to the point of the resource? So ultimately, this would allow Indonesia to develop as I know that similar took place in India with X, with, I don't know, let's say we're talking about bio energy. So it could be, as I know this happened similarly in India with biogas. So just a quick sentence, slotting it in, showing you've got wider subject knowledge. Lastly, is there any models that you could slot in there, like Bradshaw model or Rostow's model? So if you know a model, okay, that you could just mention that supports your point, slot it in. If you can slot in 2 or 3 of these, just a sentence or 2 in your explanations, that will help you with AO2. Right, we're pretty much done. Last thing, I've said that it has been, that there's 2 8 markers, and so far on all papers they've been assessed. Quick reminder, evaluate. If it's evaluate instead, the structure we use is 3 paragraphs. First paragraph, we started with using the phrase on one hand, and the evaluate questions are arguments. You're basically doing one side of an argument, other side of an argument, making a decision in the conclusion. So you're going to say on one hand, that's going to be one side of an argument, and you're going to start your second paragraph with on the other hand, which is the other side of the argument, and lastly, you're then going to go into conclusion. The conclusion can't be 2 or 3 sentences on evaluate, like assess. Evaluate questions need a proper full conclusion, proper paragraph, which is where you summarize both sides, you make a substantiated judgment as to which side of the argument you're on, and you must justify your decision why. And again, we're going to use Peel, okay? So Peel for on one hand, Peel on the other hand. Evidence for both, again, is going to be from the figures. This is evident in figure 3, which is also supported by figure 8, whatever. And in your conclusion, when you justify your decision, use the evidence you provided in your argument so far. Lastly, beginning of the paragraphs, use reflexive phrases. I would just use on one hand, on the other hand, overall. On one hand of the argument, on the other hand of the argument, overall, I am on the following side because justify it. Okay, I did evaluate quickly. Go to paper 1 or paper 2, hit the timestamps for evaluate if you want to look at that in more detail. And that is it. I hope this helps. Good luck with your exams, everyone.